The Battle of Monterrey, 1846, a turning point in the Mexican-American War. The Battle of Monterrey, fought from September 21 to September 24, 1846, was one of the most significant early engagements of the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. This conflict arose from long-standing tensions between the United States and Mexico over territorial disputes, particularly regarding the annexation of Texas. The battle marked a critical moment in the war, showcasing the strategic prowess of American forces under General Zachary Taylor and the determined resistance of Mexican troops led by General Pedro de Ampudia. The fall of Monterrey, a key city in northern Mexico, demonstrated the growing strength of the U.S. military and set the stage for further American advances into Mexican territory. This article explores the historical context, key events, military strategies, and consequences of the Battle of Monterrey, providing a comprehensive analysis of its significance in the broader narrative of the Mexican-American War. Historical context: the annexation of Texas and the road to war. The roots of the Mexican-American War can be traced back to the Texas Revolution, 1835 to 1836, during which American settlers in Texas fought for and won independence from Mexico. The Republic of Texas existed as an independent nation for nearly a decade before it was annexed by the United States in 1845. Mexico, which had never formally recognized Texas's independence, viewed the annexation as an act of aggression. The dispute over the border between Texas and Mexico further exacerbated tensions. While the U.S. claimed the Rio Grande as the boundary, Mexico insisted on the Nueces River, located further north. Political and military preparations. In early 1846, President James K. Polk, a strong advocate of manifest destiny, ordered American troops under General Zachary Taylor to occupy the disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. This move was perceived as a provocation by Mexico, and skirmishes soon broke out. The Battle of Palo Alto, May 8, 1846, and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma, May 9, 1846, were early victories for Taylor's forces, prompting Polk to formally declare war on Mexico on May 13, 1846. Monterrey, a strategic target. Monterrey, the capital of the Mexican state of Nuevo León, was a vital strategic and economic hub. Located in a valley surrounded by mountains, the city was well fortified and served as a key supply center for Mexican forces. Capturing Monterrey would allow the U.S. to establish a foothold in northern Mexico and disrupt Mexican supply lines, paving the way for further advances. The opposing forces. The United States Army. General Zachary Taylor commanded a force of approximately 6,000 men, consisting of regular Army units and volunteer regiments from states such as Texas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Taylor's army was well equipped with artillery and benefited from the leadership of experienced officers, including William J. Worth and John A. Quitman. The Mexican Army. General Pedro de Ampudia led the Mexican defense of Monterrey with around 7,000 troops. Ampudia's forces included regular soldiers, militia units, and cavalry. The city's defenses were bolstered by fortifications, including the Citadel of Monterrey, La Ciudadela, and several fortified positions in the surrounding hills. The Battle of Monterrey, key events September 20 to 21, Initial skirmishes and reconnaissance. Taylor's army arrived near Monterrey on September 19, 1846, and began preparations for the assault. On September 20, American forces conducted reconnaissance missions to assess the city's defenses. Mexican troops launched several probing attacks to disrupt these efforts, but they were repelled by U.S. artillery. September 21. The assault begins. The battle officially began on September 21 with a two-pronged attack. General Worth led a division to capture key positions west of the city, including Federation Hill and Independence Hill, while Taylor's main force advanced from the east. Worth's troops successfully seized Federation Hill after a fierce engagement, securing a strategic vantage point. September 22–23, street fighting and urban combat. By September 22, American forces had penetrated Monterrey's outer defenses, and intense street fighting ensued. Mexican troops and civilians resisted fiercely, using barricades and buildings to their advantage. The U.S. Army employed innovative tactics, such as using battering rams to breach doors and windows, to overcome these obstacles. September 24. The surrender. After 3 days of brutal combat, General Ampudia requested a ceasefire on September 23. Negotiations led to the Treaty of Monterrey, under which Mexican forces were allowed to withdraw from the city with their weapons and supplies. Taylor, eager to avoid further casualties, agreed to the terms, and the Mexican army evacuated Monterrey on September 24. Military strategies and tactics. American innovations. The Battle of Monterrey highlighted the effectiveness of American artillery and the adaptability of U.S. troops in urban combat. Taylor's decision to divide his forces and attack from multiple directions demonstrated strategic flexibility, while Worth's capture of the western hills showcased the importance of controlling high ground. Mexican defenses. Ampudia's use of fortifications and urban terrain reflected a strong defensive strategy. However, the Mexican army's lack of coordination and resources ultimately hindered its ability to repel the American advance. Consequences and legacy. Strategic impact. The fall of Monterrey was a significant blow to Mexican morale and a major victory for the United States. It solidified Taylor's reputation as a capable commander and paved the way for further American campaigns in Mexico, including the eventual capture of Mexico City. Human cost. The battle resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. The U.S. suffered approximately 120 killed and 368 wounded, while Mexican losses were estimated at 367 killed and wounded, with many more captured or missing. Political ramifications. The Battle of Monterrey intensified debates in the United States over the war's objectives and morality. Critics, including members of the Whig Party, accused Polk of pursuing an unjust and expansionist conflict. In Mexico, the defeat exacerbated internal divisions and weakened the government of President Mariano Paredes. The Battle of Monterrey was a defining moment in the Mexican-American War, showcasing the determination and resourcefulness of both American and Mexican forces. While the U.S. emerged victorious, the battle underscored the challenges of urban warfare and the complexities of military occupation. Monterrey's fall marked a turning point in the conflict, setting the stage for the eventual U.S. victory and the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which ceded vast territories to the United States, including present-day California, Arizona, and New Mexico. If you would like to expand this article further, I can provide additional sections on specific aspects of the battle, such as detailed accounts of key engagements, profiles of military leaders, or analyses of the battles. Long-term impact on U.S.-Mexico relations. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The Battle of Monterrey, fought from September 21 to September 24, 1846, was a pivotal engagement during the Mexican-American War. This conflict, which lasted from 1846 to 1848, was a result of territorial disputes between the United States and Mexico, particularly over the annexation of Texas by the U.S. in 1845. The Battle of Monterrey was one of the early major battles of the war and was significant for several reasons, including the strategic objectives pursued by the U.S. forces. This article will delve into the main strategic objectives of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey, examining the political, military, and logistical considerations that shaped their approach to this critical engagement. Historical context. The Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War was a conflict that arose from the annexation of Texas by the United States in 1845. Mexico had never recognized Texas's independence following the Texas Revolution in 1836, and considered the annexation an act of aggression. The U.S., on the other hand, viewed the annexation as a legitimate expansion of its territory. Tensions escalated, leading to a series of skirmishes along the disputed border between Texas and Mexico. In April 1846, following the Thornton Affair, where Mexican forces clashed with U.S. troops in the disputed territory, President James K. Polk asked Congress to declare war on Mexico. Congress obliged, and the Mexican-American War began. The strategic importance of Monterrey, the capital of the Mexican state of Nuevo León, was a key strategic location during the war. Situated in northeastern Mexico, Monterrey was a major commercial and military hub. Control of Monterrey would provide the U.S. forces with a significant foothold in northern Mexico, allowing them to disrupt Mexican supply lines, secure key transportation routes, and establish a base for further operations into the Mexican heartland. Additionally, capturing Monterrey would demonstrate the strength and resolve of the U.S. military, potentially forcing Mexico to negotiate a favorable peace settlement. The U.S. military strategy in the Mexican-American War. Overview of U.S. military strategy. The U.S. military strategy during the Mexican-American War was multifaceted, involving both land and naval operations. The primary objectives were to secure the disputed territories, including Texas, and to force Mexico to cede additional territories to the United States. The U.S. planned to achieve these objectives through a combination of offensive operations, including invasions of Mexican territory, and defensive measures to protect U.S. borders. The war was fought on multiple fronts, including northern Mexico, California, and the Gulf Coast. The U.S. Navy played a crucial role in blockading Mexican ports and supporting amphibious operations, while the Army conducted ground campaigns to capture key cities and territories. The Battle of Monterrey was part of the broader strategy to secure northern Mexico and establish U.S. control over the region. The role of General Zachary Taylor. General Zachary Taylor, a seasoned military commander, was tasked with leading the U.S. forces in northern Mexico. Taylor's army, known as the Army of Occupation, was composed of regular U.S. Army units and volunteer regiments from various states. Taylor's mission was to advance into northern Mexico, capture key cities, and establish U.S. control over the region. Taylor's approach to the campaign was characterized by a combination of aggressive offensive operations and careful logistical planning. He understood the importance of securing supply lines and maintaining the morale of his troops, which were essential for sustaining a prolonged campaign in hostile territory. Taylor's leadership and strategic acumen would be put to the test during the Battle of Monterrey. The strategic objectives of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey: 1. Securing a strategic foothold in northern Mexico. One of the primary strategic objectives of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey was to secure a strategic foothold in northern Mexico. Monterrey was a key city in the region, and its capture would provide the U.S. with a base of operations for further advances into Mexican territory. Control of Monterrey would also allow the U.S. to disrupt Mexican supply lines and communications, weakening the Mexican military's ability to resist U.S. advances. The U.S. forces aimed to achieve this objective through a combination of direct assault and flanking maneuvers. General Taylor planned to attack the city from multiple directions, overwhelming the Mexican defenders and forcing them to surrender. The capture of Monterrey would not only provide a strategic advantage but also serve as a psychological blow to the Mexican government and military, demonstrating the U.S.'s determination and capability to achieve its war aims. 2. Demonstrating U.S. military strength and resolve. Another key strategic objective of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey was to demonstrate U.S. military strength and resolve. The Mexican-American War was a contentious issue in the United States, with significant opposition from anti-war factions, particularly in the North. By achieving a decisive victory at Monterrey, the U.S. military aimed to bolster public support for the war and demonstrate the effectiveness of the U.S. armed forces. A successful campaign in northern Mexico, culminating in the capture of Monterrey, would also send a clear message to the Mexican government that the U.S. was committed to achieving its war aims through military force. This demonstration of strength was intended to pressure Mexico into negotiating a peace settlement favorable to the United States, potentially leading to the cession of additional territories. 3. Disrupting Mexican supply lines and communications. Disrupting Mexican supply lines and communications was another critical strategic objective of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey. Monterrey was a major transportation hub, with roads and railways connecting it to other key cities in northern Mexico. By capturing Monterrey, the U.S. forces could sever these supply lines, making it difficult for the Mexican military to reinforce and resupply its troops in the region. This objective was closely tied to the broader U.S. strategy of weakening the Mexican military's ability to resist U.S. advances. By disrupting supply lines and communications, the U.S. forces aimed to create logistical challenges for the Mexican army, reducing its effectiveness in subsequent engagements. This would pave the way for further U.S. advances into Mexican territory and increase the likelihood of a favorable peace settlement. 4. Establishing a base for further operations. Establishing a base for further operations was another important strategic objective of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey. Capturing Monterrey would provide the U.S. military with a secure base from which to launch additional campaigns into the Mexican heartland. This base would serve as a logistical hub, allowing the U.S. forces to resupply and reinforce their troops as they advanced deeper into Mexican territory. The establishment of a base in Monterrey would also enable the U.S. military to project power more effectively in the region. From Monterrey, the U.S. forces could conduct operations to capture other key cities, such as Saltillo and San Luis Potosí, further consolidating U.S. control over northern Mexico. This objective was essential for the long-term success of the U.S. military campaign in Mexico. 5. Protecting U.S. interests and citizens in the region. Protecting U.S. interests and citizens in the region was another strategic objective of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey. The annexation of Texas had brought a significant number of U.S. citizens into the region, and their safety and property were a concern for the U.S. government. By securing Monterrey and the surrounding area, the U.S. military aimed to protect these citizens and ensure the stability of the region. This objective was also tied to the broader goal of establishing U.S. control over northern Mexico. By protecting U.S. interests and citizens, the U.S. military could demonstrate its commitment to the region and reinforce the legitimacy of U.S. claims to the disputed territories. This would help to consolidate U.S. control and pave the way for the eventual annexation of additional Mexican territories. 6. Forcing Mexico to negotiate a favorable peace settlement. Finally, one of the overarching strategic objectives of the U.S. forces during the Battle of Monterrey was to force Mexico to negotiate a favorable peace settlement. The U.S. government sought to achieve its war aims through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic negotiations. By achieving a decisive victory at Monterrey, the U.S. military aimed to demonstrate its superiority and compel Mexico to come to the negotiating table. A favorable peace settlement would involve the cession of significant territories to the United States, including California, New Mexico, and other parts of northern Mexico. The capture of Monterrey was seen as a critical step in achieving this objective, as it would demonstrate the U.S.'s ability to project power deep into Mexican territory and weaken Mexico's ability to resist U.S. demands. The Battle of Monterrey. A detailed analysis. The prelude to the battle. The Battle of Monterrey was preceded by a series of engagements and maneuvers as the U.S. forces advanced into northern Mexico. General Zachary Taylor's Army of Occupation had already achieved several victories, including the Battle of Palo Alto and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma, which had forced the Mexican army to retreat southward. Taylor's forces continued their advance, capturing the city of Matamoros and establishing a base of operations at Camargo. From Camargo, Taylor's army marched southward toward Monterrey, encountering little resistance along the way. The Mexican forces, under the command of General Pedro de Ampudia, had fortified Monterrey in anticipation of the U.S. advance. Ampudia's forces were well entrenched in the city, with strong defensive positions and a determined resolve to resist the U.S. invasion. The battle begins, September 21, 1846. The Battle of Monterrey began on September 21, 1846, with U.S. forces launching a coordinated assault on the city. General Taylor's plan involved a two-pronged attack, with one division attacking from the east and another from the west. The goal was to overwhelm the Mexican defenders and force them to surrender. The eastern attack, led by General William J. Worth, aimed to capture key positions on the outskirts of the city, including the fortified heights of Independence Hill and Federation Hill. These positions were critical for controlling the approaches to the city and would provide the U.S. forces with a strategic advantage. The Western attack, led by General Taylor himself, aimed to penetrate the city's defenses and engage the Mexican forces in street fighting. The Eastern attack, Independence Hill and Federation Hill. The Eastern attack, led by General Worth, was a critical component of the U.S. strategy. Worth's division faced significant challenges, including difficult terrain and well-entrenched Mexican defenders. Despite these obstacles, Worth's forces managed to achieve their objectives, capturing Independence Hill and Federation Hill after intense fighting. The capture of these positions allowed the U.S. forces to establish artillery batteries that could bombard the city and support the Western attack. This success was a significant achievement for the U.S. forces and demonstrated the effectiveness of their coordinated assault strategy. The Western attack, street fighting in Monterrey. The Western attack, led by General Taylor, involved direct engagement with the Mexican forces in the city of Monterrey. The U.S. troops faced fierce resistance from the Mexican defenders, who had fortified key buildings and streets. The fighting was intense and often hand-to-hand, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite the challenges, the U.S. forces managed to make progress, capturing key positions and pushing the Mexican defenders back. The street fighting was brutal and chaotic, but the U.S. troops' determination and superior firepower eventually turned the tide in their favor. The surrender of Monterrey, September 24, 1846. After 3 days of intense fighting, the Mexican forces under General Ampudia were forced to surrender. The U.S. forces had achieved their objectives, capturing key positions and overwhelming the Mexican defenders. General Ampudia, recognizing the futility of further resistance, agreed to a negotiated surrender. The terms of the surrender allowed the Mexican forces to withdraw from the city with their weapons and equipment, but Monterrey was now under U.S. control. The capture of Monterrey was a significant victory for the U.S. forces, and marked a turning point in the Mexican-American War. The aftermath of the Battle of Monterrey. Strategic implications of the U.S. victory. The U.S. victory at Monterrey had significant strategic implications for the Mexican-American War. The capture of Monterrey provided the U.S. forces with a strategic foothold in northern Mexico, allowing them to establish a base for further operations. The disruption of Mexican supply lines and communications weakened the Mexican military's ability to resist U.S. advances, paving the way for further U.S. victories. The victory at Monterrey also demonstrated the effectiveness of the U.S. military's strategy and tactics, bolstering public support for the war and increasing pressure on the Mexican government to negotiate a peace settlement. The U.S. forces' ability to achieve their objectives at Monterrey reinforced the perception of U.S. military superiority and set the stage for the eventual U.S. victory in the war. Political and diplomatic consequences. The U.S. victory at Monterrey also had significant political and diplomatic consequences. The capture of Monterrey increased pressure on the Mexican government to negotiate a peace settlement, as the U.S. demonstrated its ability to project power deep into Mexican territory. The U.S. government sought to use this leverage to achieve its war aims, including the cession of significant territories. However, the Mexican government remained reluctant to negotiate, and the war continued for another 2 years. The U.S. victory at Monterrey was a critical step in the eventual U.S. victory, but it did not immediately lead to a peace settlement. The political and diplomatic efforts to end the war would continue alongside the military campaign's impact on U.S. public opinion. The U.S. victory at Monterrey had a significant impact on public opinion in the United States. The war was a contentious issue, with significant opposition from anti-war factions, particularly in the North. The victory at Monterrey helped to bolster public support for the war, as it demonstrated the effectiveness of the U.S. military and the potential for achieving the war's objectives. The victory also reinforced the perception of U.S. military superiority and the belief in the nation's manifest destiny to expand across the continent. This belief in the righteousness of the U.S. cause and the inevitability of U.S. expansion played a significant role in shaping public opinion and political discourse during the war. The Battle of Monterrey was a pivotal engagement during the Mexican-American War, with significant strategic, political, and diplomatic implications. The U.S. forces' main strategic objectives during the battle included securing a strategic foothold in northern Mexico, demonstrating U.S. military strength and resolve, disrupting Mexican supply lines and communications, establishing a base for further operations, protecting U.S. interests and citizens in the region, and forcing Mexico to negotiate a favorable peace settlement. The U.S. victory at Monterrey achieved many of these objectives, providing the U.S. forces with a strategic advantage, and increasing pressure on the Mexican government to negotiate. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of the U.S. military's strategy and tactics, bolstering public support for the war and reinforcing the perception of U.S. military superiority. The Battle of Monterrey was a critical step in the eventual U.S. victory in the Mexican-American War, paving the way for further U.S. advances into Mexican territory and the eventual cession of significant territories to the United States. The strategic objectives pursued by the U.S. forces during the battle were essential for achieving the broader war aims and shaping the outcome of the conflict. The Mexican Army of the North and the Battle of Monterrey, a comprehensive analysis of preparations, strategies, and challenges. Introduction. The Battle of Monterrey, fought from September 21 to September 24, 1846, was a pivotal engagement during the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. This battle marked a significant moment in the conflict, as it was one of the first major confrontations between the Mexican Army of the North and the United States Army under the command of General Zachary Taylor. The Mexican Army of the North, led by General Pedro de Ampudia, faced the daunting task of defending the strategically important city of Monterrey against a well-equipped and determined American force. This article delves into the extensive preparations undertaken by the Mexican Army of the North in the lead-up to the Battle of Monterrey, examining the strategic, logistical, and operational challenges they faced, as well as the broader political and social context that influenced their efforts. Chapter 1. The Mexican-American War and the Strategic Importance of Monterrey. 1.1 The origins of the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War was a conflict rooted in the annexation of Texas by the United States in 1845 and the subsequent dispute over the Texas-Mexico border. Mexico refused to recognize Texas's independence or its annexation by the United States, leading to tensions that eventually erupted into open warfare. The United States, under President James K. Polk, sought to expand its territory westward, while Mexico was determined to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. 1.2 The strategic importance of Monterrey. Monterrey, the capital of the state of Nuevo León, was a key strategic location in northern Mexico. Situated at the foothills of the Sierra Madre Oriental, Monterrey was a vital commercial and military hub. Control of Monterrey would provide the United States with a gateway to northern Mexico and a base for further operations into the heart of the country. For Mexico, defending Monterrey was crucial to maintaining control over the northern states and preventing the American advance. Chapter 2, The Mexican Army of the North, Composition and Command Structure. 2.1 The composition of the Mexican Army of the North. The Mexican Army of the North was a diverse force composed of regular army units, militia, and volunteers. The regular army units were typically better trained and equipped, but they were often outnumbered by the militia and volunteers, who varied widely in terms of experience and effectiveness. The army also included cavalry units, which were crucial for reconnaissance and mobility in the rugged terrain of northern Mexico. 2.2 Command Structure and Leadership. General Pedro de Ampudia was appointed as the commander of the Mexican Army of the North in the lead-up to the Battle of Monterrey. Ampudia was an experienced officer who had previously served in the Texas Revolution and the Pastry War. However, his leadership was often criticized for being overly cautious and indecisive. Ampudia's command structure included several key officers, such as General Francisco Mejia and General José López Uraga, who played important roles in the defense of Monterrey. Chapter 3, Preparations for the Defense of Monterrey. 3.1 Intelligence Gathering and Reconnaissance. One of the first steps taken by the Mexican Army of the North in preparation for the Battle of Monterrey was to gather intelligence on the approaching American forces. Ampudia dispatched cavalry units to conduct reconnaissance and monitor the movements of General Taylor's army. This intelligence was crucial for understanding the size, composition, and intentions of the American forces, as well as for planning the defense of Monterrey. 3.2 Fortifications and defensive works. The Mexican Army of the North undertook extensive efforts to fortify Monterrey in anticipation of the American attack. The city's natural defenses, including the surrounding mountains and rivers, were augmented with man-made fortifications. Key positions, such as the Independence Hill, Cerro de la Independencia, and the Bishop's Palace, Palacio del Obispado, were fortified with artillery emplacements, trenches, and barricades. The Mexican engineers also constructed defensive works along the main roads leading into the city, including the Saltillo Road and the Matamoros Road. 3.3 Supply and logistics. Supplying the Mexican Army of the North was a significant challenge, given the remote location of Monterrey and the limited infrastructure in northern Mexico. The army relied on a combination of local resources and supplies transported from other parts of the country. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies were stockpiled in Monterrey, but the logistical difficulties of maintaining a large army in the field were a constant concern. The Mexican government also faced financial constraints, which limited its ability to provide adequate support to the Army. 3.4 Training and discipline. The Mexican Army of the North faced significant challenges in terms of training and discipline. While the regular army units were relatively well trained, the militia and volunteers often lacked the experience and discipline needed for effective combat. Ampudia and his officers worked to improve the training and readiness of the troops, but time and resources were limited. The army also struggled with issues of morale, as many soldiers were reluctant to fight against a well-equipped and determined enemy. Chapter 4, Political and Social Context 4.1 Political instability in Mexico. The Mexican government was plagued by political instability during the lead-up to the Battle of Monterrey. The country had experienced a series of coups and changes in leadership, which undermined the government's ability to effectively coordinate the war effort. The central government in Mexico City was often at odds with regional leaders, including those in northern Mexico, who had their own priorities and concerns. This political instability had a direct impact on the Mexican Army of the North, as it affected the allocation of resources and the overall strategy for defending Monterrey. 4.2 Social and economic challenges. The social and economic conditions in Mexico also posed significant challenges for the Mexican Army of the North. The country was still recovering from the economic devastation of the Texas Revolution and the Pastry War, and the government struggled to raise the funds needed to support the war effort. The population in northern Mexico was also divided, with some communities supporting the Mexican government and others sympathetic to the American cause. These social and economic challenges further complicated the task of preparing for the defense of Monterrey. Chapter 5, The American Advance and the Mexican Response. 5.1 The American advance into northern Mexico. General Zachary Taylor's army began its advance into northern Mexico in the spring of 1846, following the initial skirmishes along the Rio Grande. Taylor's forces were well equipped and well trained, and they quickly gained the upper hand in the early stages of the war. The American advance was marked by a series of victories, including the Battle of Palo Alto and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma, which forced the Mexican Army of the North to retreat towards Monterrey. 5.2 The Mexican response to the American advance. As the American forces advanced towards Monterrey, the Mexican Army of the North worked to consolidate its defenses and prepare for the impending battle. Ampudia and his officers recognized the importance of holding Monterrey, and they made every effort to strengthen the city's defenses and rally the troops. However, the Mexican army faced significant challenges in terms of morale and coordination, as the rapid American advance and the series of defeats had a demoralizing effect on the troops. Chapter 6, The Battle of Monterrey. 6.1 The opening engagements. The Battle of Monterrey began on September 21, 1846, with a series of skirmishes between the American and Mexican forces on the outskirts of the city. The American army, divided into several columns, launched a coordinated assault on the Mexican positions, targeting key fortifications and defensive works. The Mexican defenders, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, put up a determined resistance, using the terrain and fortifications to their advantage. 6.2 The fight for Independence Hill and the Bishop's Palace. One of the most intense and critical engagements of the Battle of Monterrey was the fight for Independence Hill and the Bishop's Palace. These positions were heavily fortified and strategically important, as they provided a commanding view of the city and the surrounding area. The American forces launched a determined assault on these positions, facing fierce resistance from the Mexican defenders. After several hours of intense fighting, the American forces were able to capture Independence Hill and the Bishop's Palace, dealing a significant blow to the Mexican defense. 6.3 Street fighting and the final assault. As the battle progressed, the fighting moved into the streets of Monterrey, where the Mexican defenders continued to put up a stubborn resistance. The narrow streets and fortified buildings made it difficult for the American forces to advance, and the Mexican troops used every available advantage to slow their progress. However, the American forces, with their superior numbers and firepower, were eventually able to overcome the Mexican defenses and secure control of the city. 6.4 The surrender and aftermath. After 3 days of intense fighting, General Ampudia realized that further resistance was futile and agreed to a negotiated surrender. The terms of the surrender allowed the Mexican forces to withdraw from Monterrey with their arms and equipment, while the American forces took control of the city. The Battle of Monterrey was a significant victory for the United States, but it came at a high cost in terms of casualties and resources. For the Mexican Army of the North, the defeat at Monterrey was a major setback, but it also demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Mexican troops in the face of overwhelming odds. Chapter 7. Analysis and Conclusion. 7.1 The effectiveness of the Mexican preparations. The preparations undertaken by the Mexican Army of the North for the Battle of Monterrey were extensive and demonstrated a high level of commitment and effort. The fortifications and defensive works constructed around Monterrey were impressive and played a crucial role in the defense of the city. However, the Mexican army faced significant challenges in terms of logistics, training, and morale, which ultimately limited their effectiveness in the face of a well-equipped and determined American force. 7.2 The impact of political and social factors. The political and social context in Mexico had a significant impact on the preparations and outcome of the Battle of Monterrey. The political instability and economic challenges faced by the Mexican government undermined its ability to effectively support the war effort, while the divided loyalties of the population in northern Mexico further complicated the task of defending Monterrey. These factors, combined with the rapid American advance and the series of defeats suffered by the Mexican army, created a difficult and challenging environment for the Mexican Army of the North. 7.3 The legacy of the Battle of Monterrey. The Battle of Monterrey was a pivotal moment in the Mexican-American War, and it had a lasting impact on the course of the conflict. The American victory at Monterrey demonstrated the effectiveness of their military strategy and the determination of their troops, while the Mexican defeat highlighted the challenges and limitations faced by the Mexican army. The battle also had broader implications for the relationship between the United States and Mexico, as it set the stage for further American advances into Mexican territory and the eventual conclusion of the war with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in July 4, 1848. Conclusion. The preparations undertaken by the Mexican Army of the North for the Battle of Monterrey were a testament to the resilience and determination of the Mexican troops in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite the challenges they faced, the Mexican defenders put up a determined and courageous resistance, demonstrating their commitment to defending their homeland. The Battle of Monterrey was a significant and hard-fought engagement that had a lasting impact on the course of the Mexican-American War and the broader history of the region.